Welcome to our Facebook Live event on Tuesday, May 25th, 2021. And I would like to welcome our guests, Caroline Lubbe and Dr. Lynn Lim. Caroline is an executive board member for supporting the emotional needs of the gifted, SENG. She has a background in litigation, corporate law, and information privacy. Caroline left her legal career to assist her son in his educational experience as a twice exceptional learner. And she and her husband actively participate in their children's education from parent participation cooperatives to public and independent schools and enrichment programs for gifted children. She's a trained SENG Model Parent Group facilitator and a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley and Golden Gate University Law School. Dr. Lynn Lim is a board member of SENG as well, and a graduate of Boston University, where she earned a PhD in human development. She also holds an academic graduate certificate in twice exceptional education from Bridges Graduate School of Cognitive Diversity and Education, and completed an academic graduate certificate in mind, brain, and education from Johns Hopkins University Graduate School of Education. Dr. Lim volunteers for education-related nonprofits as she journeys through parenting her gifted children. And she's a founding board member of the Gifted Education Family Network, a Texas nonprofit supporting gifted programming in public education. Welcome everybody to collaboratively nurturing gifted outliers through strong educator-parent-practitioner relationships.
Thank you, Mark, for the generous introduction. Caroline and I are very happy to be on for my first Facebook Live event, and we're happy to have this conversation with our participants. And we're going to start right now. Caroline, would you like to do a short intro?
I will, and I do thank you, Mark, and Colorado Association for Gifted and Talented for hosting us tonight. And thank you, everyone, for joining us through Facebook and anyone who may be seeing this later. We're going to start this evening with a way to set our intentions and our tone with a video that resonates deeply for Lynn and me. Lynn, if you'll start the video, please.
All right, I hope you find this video thought-provoking on many levels. I still kind of tear up when I watch the video. And here's an overview of our session this afternoon. We will begin with some introductions, and then followed by who are gifted outliers. And then we'll end with who are the stakeholders and why we need to leverage on a collaborative partnership between all stakeholders and how that can look like. We would really like to engage our participants to consider multiple levels of analysis in order to come up with actions that all contribute towards a consolidated whole. Our gifted outliers are outliers 24/7, so they cannot be understood from their constituent parts in isolation.
Thank you, Lynn. My name is Caroline Lubbe. I'm streaming from Los Angeles this evening, where I live with my husband and our 2 children. My son is 12 years old and my daughter is 10. Both are gifted outliers. Prior to my journey in outlier parenting, I was indeed a practicing attorney, as Mark mentioned, in litigation, data privacy, and information technology. I worked in private practice and as general and in-house counsel with a financial holding company as chief privacy officer. It was very fulfilling and very challenging, and nothing compared to the challenges presented with outlier parenting. When my son was 4 years old, and not fitting neatly into preschool, I took a 6-month sabbatical to get his emotional, educational needs and supports sorted. That 6-month sabbatical was 8 years ago, and I never returned to work. So here I am, deeply involved in education and gifted education. I've served in school parent organizations, on boards in private and public schools. I volunteer with Reluctant Readers and have been trained as a reading mentor in public school settings. I am happy to serve with SENG, supporting emotional needs of the gifted, and be a certified SENG Model Parent Group facilitator. I'm also enrolled in the Bridges Graduate School for a certification in cognitive diversity. And through my children, I now have firsthand experience with exceptionally and profoundly gifted individuals, one who also is high achieving and one who is twice exceptional. Lynn?
Thank you, Caroline. Hi, I'm so happy to be here with everyone. My journey is in many ways parallels Caroline, but also different in that I grew up in Singapore and I have a different educational background from Caroline. I have a bachelor's in economics and environmental studies. I have a doctorate in psychology in human development, and that was in the 2000s. And I was very interested in sort of interdisciplinary perspectives on human development, which really is just starting to begin now. So after graduation, I went into business, so nothing to do with education or psychology or anything like that. And when I became a parent, this sort of, through my own parenting, it renewed my interest in human development. And in our situation, it was an accidental discovery that I have a profoundly gifted and twice exceptional child when he was about 8.5. So our journey has been much shorter, very intense. It's been about 5 years. And at the same time, because of his journey, we had also tested my older daughter, and she is profoundly gifted and has very, very different needs between the two. So through my challenges in trying to find relevant information to understand my children and also to parent my children, I've gone through, I became a substitute teacher for 2 years because I was really curious, because I did not grow up in the United States. So I was really curious in what does public education look like? And so I did that for 2 years. And then after that, it drove me to complete the 2 graduate certificate programs, which I just completed, one last year and one this year. And in the meantime, I've always volunteered my time with nonprofits that support education in general. But recently, I've sort of shifted my focus to nonprofits that support gifted families, especially with an interest to bring low or free knowledge tools and programming to diverse and disadvantaged gifted families. So here's our introduction, and we're going to move on.
As we start discussing the different types of gifted outliers, here we have profoundly gifted individuals. These are statistically infrequent. When you look at that bell curve, the profoundly gifted population, it can be measured in several different ways, of a score of greater than 145 on an IQ and achievement test, or those who score in the third standard deviation or 99.9th percentile on those types of tests. How rare this would be, without going into great detail on all the deviations, the majority of the population falls within the 85 to 115 IQ range. That's about 68.26% of individuals are in that range. As we start moving out toward the outer edges, including the profoundly gifted segment, we're talking about 0.13 or 0.13% of the population is more than 3 standard deviations away from that mean. So 145 to 160, 0.13%, or 13 out of 10,000 individuals are considered profoundly gifted. And even more rare than that if you get above 160 at 0.003%. So what we're talking about really here are statistically infrequent gifted outliers, so that in a general education setting, most educators will have less opportunities to become familiar with this population. Lynn?
And then here's another gifted outliers, the twice exceptional students. How frequent are they? Well, it's not really clear currently, but statistics estimates range currently from 360,000 to, depending on what the inclusion criteria are, to about 610,000. So we really don't really know. Those are estimates. Interestingly, the national education, national statistics for National Council for National Council for Educational Statistics does not. They have statistics for a lot of stuff related to education, but they don't have any statistics on twice exceptional students. So what are twice exceptional students? So in a very, very simplistic way, they are students that, on one hand, looking at the yellows on the left of your screen, have at least demonstrate one high abilities, and then on the right-hand side, at the same time, they have at least one complex challenges, which are disabilities. And what happens is that both two colors that you see creates the green, and that is the twice exceptional students. They are green all the time because they are a mix of their gifts on one hand and their disabilities on the other hand. And gifted outliers, again, as Caroline has says, is statistically infrequent. So you have the profoundly gifted that are statistically infrequent. You have twice exceptional students here that are also statistically infrequent. We have some sort of estimate range currently in terms of the number of students here, but we really don't know. All we know is that they are not a large number.
And when we get to these smaller and smaller slices of the population, so now we've moved into that segment where we have profoundly gifted and a twice exceptional individual in one. These gifted outliers occur less frequently than all the others, and there aren't really precise statistics on this. In fact, one way to be thinking about this, rather than that bell curve, is thinking of it from a Venn diagram. So if you have one circle that has profoundly gifted individuals and another circle that has individuals with a disability or are twice exceptional, sort of the merging of those and the very, very narrow slice of gifted outliers. There's also a consideration here that with profoundly gifted individuals who are also twice exceptional, the identification process here becomes even more challenging. In some ways, the misidentification or dual identification, one can mask the other. So with some profoundly gifted individuals, they aren't going to fit neatly into any IQ or assessment test. And there are other means of identifying those individuals.
So, why the need for collaboration? You know, there's such a limited opportunity to gain expertise for gifted outliers, as we've shown in the last few slides. You know, so as parents, you know, our personal journey was that none of the information we read out there, parenting books, books on gifted, you know, books on disability, special ed books, even whatever we could find out there that's about twice exceptional students, didn't quite apply to our children, because in our case, we have profoundly gifted twice exceptional students. And that is, you know, this experience or lack of experience and information out there is likely to be very true for educators and many practitioners. So because of that small, infrequent, statistically infrequent numbers, and the fact that in education, in public education, that they occur so infrequently, it is even more imperative that all our stakeholders are working together in order to come up with something that makes sense. Caroline, would you add to this?
I would say that the experiences that I've had with my family, with my children, all together have provided me with many opportunities for collaboration with the team of people who are involved in my children's lives. So where I think I started, you know, you have those great books and what to expect when you're expecting, what to expect with your toddler, all that went out the window. And it was really through a collaborative approach with people who understood outliers.
Yeah. And also, if they don't, that they're open to say that we don't know anything and let's figure it out together.
And I would include in here when we talk about the that segment as stakeholders, as parents, it really is not just myself as a parent, but I'm looking at other parents of profoundly gifted children or profoundly gifted children who are twice exceptional, because they become part of my resource.
Yeah. And here on the right is our modified 1387 rule. And what that means, the 1387 rule is the statistics that 13% of of a year, 13% of the waking hours in 1 year is spent by students inside of a school. So if you take an assumption that I think the statistics came up with an assumption of 8 hours of sleep. So 87% of the time, our students, our children, you know, the time that they spent is outside of a school. And then 13% of the time is the amount of time that is spent in public schools, K through 12. In in general, and this does not include any after school activities or before school activities, so that's not counting that. And if you look at just looking at the pie, the statistics is telling us that I think hopefully showing to everybody visually why it is so important, I think, in general for all students, but in particular for gifted outliers, that we need, this collaboration. We know from neuroscience about the interconnections between our physical, intellectual, emotional, and social needs, which with such limited time and interactions that educators have with our gifted outliers, you know, parents and practitioners and mentors, can and often are willing resources to collaborate with our educators so that, with any information, observations, questions that they come across, so that everyone can grow more richly from increased collaborations and increased collective knowledge on this. Um, Caroline, would you like to add to this?
I would. I think it's from the time that you first showed me this information. It was really a surprise to me how much time was spent outside of this arena, and so understanding the necessity of having parents being involved, having the gifted individuals themselves, our gifted outliers, having their involvement, because we're all seeking to find that interconnection.
Yeah. Caroline, go ahead.
Sure. And so here we have the ways in which we have these day-to-day supports together with a big picture view. And this is really important and really is the thrust of our discussion this evening. What we're looking at are ways of seeking a balance between day-to-day supports and expectations and the understanding for our gifted outliers that maintains a foundational, bigger picture view of those needs. And so we're going to leave this up here as we talk about different examples of how this might work. Because day to day is how we have to get through the day to day, the week to week, the month to month. But without that bigger picture view, it can really skew the way we understand gifted outliers. As an example, in an academic setting, we have certain expectations for students, even or maybe especially for gifted outliers. We raise that bar for them, and we believe that they should be able to engage meaningfully without disrupting class. Recently, a very social and outgoing middle school student was not displaying the level of self-regulation appropriate to his age. And this was noted as a class distraction. And teachers contacted parents to review the behavior. But when they did this, they did it with the context of understanding that this very extroverted boy was returning to campus after being in remote learning for 15 months. He hadn't been with his friends. He'd been largely socially distant from other students his age, from other classmates, from other friends. And the exuberance of seeing these classmates overwhelmed any academic goals he had. But if we look at this just from the day-to-day perspective, he wasn't meeting expectations and standards. The bigger picture gave him some breathing room and allowed him to transition back in a healthy way and be supported by his teachers.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Caroline. And then want to address in terms of being investigators, knowing the statistics in the previous slide where our students really only spend such a small amount of time in school, and having different teachers for different periods, you could just imagine how few opportunities teachers may have to really get to know individual students. And depending on the gifted outliers, they could be sort of singled out in terms of attention, or on the other hand, completely disappear from the teacher's sort of attention if they know how to do so. So, in terms of, I'm going to give an example in terms of how being an investigator, takes a lot of time, could take a lot of time, but yet, the end result is that it gives us a fuller, richer picture of what's going on. So I have an example of a gifted outlier that is self-regulating. In this particular case, this particular middle school student who was new in this school, in a very small school, it was reported back to his family that the school is somewhat concerned because the student started about 2 months into school, started sitting by himself, during lunchtime. And the school being a very small school and other students being very helpful, and the teacher, they were talking to this student, this boy, to say, hey, would you like to join the group? They wanted to make sure this newcomer felt welcome, and he had declined politely. So as far as the school is concerned, it didn't seem like anything was wrong. However, they were kind of worried about this behavior. So this was communicated to the family, and the family was able to, after spending many, many hours, to finally figure out what was going on. And they had then communicated that back to the school. And both parties were very, very relieved and happy and grateful that this communication happened. So in the end, what the family was able to find out from the child was that the child was aware that he was sitting by himself, and that he chose to sit by himself, and that the reason why he was sitting by himself was because this was a new school, it was a gifted school, and he was very stimulated intellectually, so much so that during lunchtime was the only time he felt that he could take a break to sort of like reset himself, and he needed some downtime, and he had chosen during lunchtime to do so. And what was different for him previously was that lunchtime was his social time previously, but now lunchtime was his downtime on that. And without the school choosing to communicate, because nothing was really wrong at that time, quote unquote, but sort of they've noticed something different. If the school had not chosen to communicate that, and then the family members have not chosen to really dig deep and sort of try to figure out what was going on, then all parties would not have realized that this was what was driving his behavior. Apparently, a couple months later, that child, having assimilated and sort of like gotten into the rhythms of the school, he had no longer wanted to sit by himself and started sort of, exhibiting more typical behaviors for him. So that's an example that I have, and I think Caroline has another different example to sort of illustrate this picture that we have up on our slide.
I do, and it reinforces the collaborative nature, because all the different stakeholders, the parents, educators, professionals, and the gifted outlier themselves are a part of this, where we're talking about such unique individuals that judging them against a standard norm becomes very difficult, and you don't see their big picture. So in this example, an elementary school student, a young second grader, on a day-to-day level, was not participating in math. And the way in which the school math curriculum was structured, in second grade, they turned toward teamwork or group work or partner work. Where she had previously been very enthusiastic with respect to math, she retreated. She sat on her hands. Sometimes she put her head down. She was otherwise talkative, but in math, she would not cooperate with her fellow students. And her teachers very much prized, and the school very much prized and enforced this idea of collaborative group work. But this is an experienced teacher, and an experienced teacher who looked toward this student knowing that something didn't fit here, and reviewed with the student's first grade teacher to confirm these earlier interests in math. Something didn't fit. They went back to the parents, who also did not know that their child no longer had an interest in math. She was bringing home math worksheets. She was doing extra math on her own. They finally turned to the student, and she was very reluctant, but admitted that she knew all the answers, and she didn't want to stand out, and she didn't want to feel like she was pushing her answers on her other students, and she did not want to be seen as an outlier. But through the reassurances of her teacher and her parents and integrating her back into that classroom, she was able then to participate with her friends and her classmates and contribute. And it makes such a difference knowing that we can also turn to the gifted outliers, as young as they may be, who have pieces that are important for our investigation. I think one more thing I wanted to mention on the investigation side. One of the significant differences for me and for my family was when we were able to identify first our older child, our son, as a gifted outlier, because it changed everything in the way that we approached him. So rather than just not fitting into class or not being able to meet the expected standards, once we knew who he was, and this is really the key for us, he stopped being a problem to be solved. He became my child again. He wasn't the problem at the end of the day. And his teachers were able to view him differently because they now understood what his needs were. So I think that very key piece of understanding the identification issues plays into this in a big way. Lynn?
Yes, I completely agreed. Like I had said, in our case, the reason why we ended up doing a psychoeducational assessment was because my child was very bright as far as I knew, but I knew he was not the academically high achieving type of bright child. And I was advised by other experienced parents in our public school district that, they had to take this 3-day high stakes, several hours gifted exam to see if they would qualify. My son has dysgraphia. He would not do well. The exam was going to be pen and paper kind of like group setting. So I knew that, just he would not be able to show what he knows on that. So that was our accidental journey to get a psychoeducational assessment. When the assessment results came out, I had to kind of come to terms with is this my child? I went through that on my own in terms of my own journey. Like, is this my child? I had to kind of accept that it is my child. I was completely surprised by the results, to say the least, and that's what kind of drove me to figure out and really try to understand him more. And it's only been 5 years, and every day I'm learning something new, and that's something about the journey that we're going on, because as individuals, they are growing too. So our knowledge is always evolving because it's a dynamic interaction between us as human beings, but also as our child as human beings, and also all the interactions that we have between all the stakeholders, our physical environment, the context, just everything, interacts dynamically, and that's sort of at the bottom of it all. I wanted to let parents who are going through similar journeys and educators know it's okay not to know, and we're in this together, at the bottom, at the end.
I do think of what we are doing when we collaborate. That includes, as parents, when we advocate for our children, it doesn't necessarily mean conflict. It shouldn't have to mean conflict. And part of, I think, the advocacy work is the sharing of information that we've accumulated. I mean, when we talk about these very, very narrow slices of population, we know that educators don't have the sometimes hours of time that are necessary to investigate and peel back all the layers to find out the truth of our child. But if we collaborate, we can extend then the information that we have together with the experiences that the teachers and administrators are seeing and the work that we're doing with professionals and clinicians to come together to further support these gifted outliers.
And I think I'm going to stop sharing my slide for now. I'm going to just briefly show the references if people are interested. So when you watch the YouTube, you should be able to pause and get a, read up the references that are in the specific slides. And I'm going to stop sharing now and invite Mark to join us for the Q&A section.
Yeah, and if you have questions for Caroline or Dr. Lim, please go ahead and type them into the comment box and I'll field those. I'm going to start with a question that I have, and to me, it's particularly intriguing and engaging, this last part when you were talking about your journey as a parent. And I wonder if both of you would just take a minute or two more to talk about how it felt as a parent to go on this journey of discovery that your child was a gifted outlier. So some of those feelings involved.
Sure, I'll be happy to start, Mark.
We could talk about it for days.
We could. I'm not sure how much of a therapy session you want this to turn into, but I could easily do that too. And I say that now, right? Smiling and laughing and being able to do this with you. But the start of this, when my child was twice exceptional before we knew, but our emerging awareness of this, that something wasn't right, probably in preschool, but we weren't able to discern what the not rightness was. It just didn't quite fit. You know, when you have a 3-year-old who asks Santa for a centrifuge and a lab monkey, and also if he can't have the lab monkey, can he have permission to experiment on his sister, his infant sister? Something was different. But the different wasn't bad until 2nd grade, when I think the academic expectations changed. And it was clear that he was very much not the same as his classmates. And almost in a defensive posture, we took him to private neuropsych testing to find out what was wrong. And the words I'm using, the words I'm choosing right now are quite intentional. Bad and wrong and didn't fit. He had 3 days of neuropsych testing. About a week later, we received the report and we sat down with the psychologist to review it. And I'm really quite serious when I say that's the point at which he stopped being a problem to be solved and came back to me as my child. Because our parenting changed within a week. In 5 days, we understood things that we didn't know. We understood that because of his processing speed, rather than calling him and expecting to come running right away, that it was better and easier for him if we walked up to him and touched him on the shoulder. It was little tips like that, right? That we needed to get his attention. Processing speed, working memory, and dysgraphia are his twice exceptionalities. We were able to adapt to that. Sometimes schools are able to adapt more quickly than others. Sometimes teachers are more familiar. Part of my advocacy became doing all this background work that I'm doing now so I could share that back to his teachers. I don't expect them to be able to do this for all of the 25 or 33 or 45 students that are in their classes. And where my son was in a gifted magnet program, it meant there were potential for higher incidences of a second E in the program that he was in. So it was really, Lynn talked about coming to terms with there being a difference. And it's not quite what you had thought or hoped for your child. For us, things had gone so off the rails, I think, that finding out that there was something really going on and that there was a name for it and we could address it was something of a relief.
Yeah. My journey was different in my story is the story where the gifts were masking the sort of deficits, and that was our case. So I was shocked because to me, I was like, how could I not see it coming? So that was, I had the reverse where I had to accept, or I ended up questioning myself, like, really? Like, I didn't see all that, whatever was revealed. So that was my journey where I had to go through a period of self-doubt and sort of like, was I a horrible parent for not seeing it? Because, you know, my although my degree wasn't in like infant development or anything like that, I was very hands-on with both my children, and yet I was, just looking at the results and thinking back, I was horrified at sort of what I've said to my child and sort of my expectations, because in his case, his report showed a lot more deficits than I saw. So that was sort of in our case, and that was our struggle in public school, was that he got into the gifted program and we were declined any assessments to even assess if he qualified for special ed services. And the attitude we were given was that, hey, he's gifted. So I'm like, okay, but that doesn't mean you don't need supports should you need that. So that was sort of what brought me on the journey to really figure out, to understand him, but also to find out if, at least in our situation, in our public schools, are they able to support him, but they didn't want to, or perhaps they're not equipped to support him. And my conclusion, having gone through like as a substitute teacher, mainly in the special ed department, was that for my child, the way that currently our public school system was set up, in the siloing between like middle school and high school, where you really don't quite crosstalk, that was preventing them from servicing my child the way he would need it. So even though he was in 5th grade, the social cues class he would really needed to be at a high school level. The teachers would tell me, he's doing great, he knows everything, he's like teaching all the other kids. And I'm thinking, yes, because that's not at the right level that he needs it. We all see that, he's autistic, but he does have needs, but not at the middle school level, sort of. And it was through no fault of our school district. I think through my journey, I've come to really see that most educators and parents were all on the same side. We want to do our best, and sometimes we don't know how to. So I like to approach this from this angle.
I think what you describe is very, very powerful for parents who love their kids. And it's the first thing we want to do is wonder how we came up so short. What
Yes.
did we do wrong? And then if that, as it transforms, right, we want to blame ourselves, and then we also want to solve the problem. But as Caroline said, to come to that understanding that it's not a problem, it's our kid, and it's very powerful. We have a question from one of our listeners right now, and it says, what is your recommendation for collaborating with a very introverted teenage child who might not know how to access answers to questions about what he needs?
And that is really key, right? I mean, we want our children to be able to understand their needs and to be able to identify their needs, but it's not always easy. I mean, if it's not easy for us to understand it, what it's like for them on the inside. I will say that what seems to help for me is, and I've heard this helps for other people too, is to drive, right? So rather than direct sort of face-to-face communication, driving with your child in the backseat of the car often helps, or talking while you're doing a different activity. So it takes the pressure off. It's not, mom or dad sitting in front of you, drilling you with questions. As a former litigator, I plead guilty to this 100 different ways. But what helps to have my children open up, and this really does make a difference, is driving. We'll drive somewhere, oftentimes something that's of interest to them. So they're looking forward to wherever we're going. It could be going out for an ice cream. It could be going, to an activity to see a movie. But that driving around just takes so much pressure off. Lynn?
So, and I have a child that is, he's very social, but when he initiates conversation, it's always much better than if I try to pull something out it's like try to, talk to a clam or something like that. So for him, what I've learned to do is that I really pay attention, and it always happens to be when I'm really busy for whatever reason, right? But he would want to talk about something. And it's important, I can tell, because the fact that he wants to initiate something, for me, knowing my child, I know it's important enough, because he says it takes him a lot of energy to open his mouth to engage. So the fact that when he initiates that, it used to be, I'm like, oh, I can't, don't talk to me now because I'm driving. Don't talk to me now because I'm cooking. Don't, whatever. Like, it always happens to be, at least in my perspective, from my side, that it happens that way. So I try my best, especially when he brings something up. If it's to me, not the right time because I'm driving, like something really dangerous, if I can, I pull off, we'll have that conversation, because if I don't catch it then, it goes away. So timing wise, it always seems to be off between my son and I, but I'm thinking I'm an adult, I can be more flexible. So I'm going to try this. And it's gotten a lot better. The other thing, which I think is very personal, would be, as you find out certain what your child has, when is a good time to have that conversation or not with your child. So I think that's a very personal decision. I don't have any way to say what may work or not. I do know that for my son, that helped him to figure things out for him, that it's not doing it on purpose. So my son is profoundly gifted. He's autistic. He has dysgraphia. He had a whole bunch of other stuff. But at the bottom line, he seems to, when I had the conversation with him, he seems to find comfort that it explains some of his quirkiness, like so for him, I don't know how it would be like, frankly, for another child. So I think that's a very personal decision. And sometimes after that, other than that, we really talk about, but it's you. We really want to focus on, who you are, want to make sure, for example, he does have dysgraphia. There's no way to go around that, it's going to be there. It's likely going to be there in his case forever. That, knowing that, we then can move on to the next stage. Well, what can we do about it? I don't think, I don't want him to, and we've had a long, very long previously heated discussion about the need to be able to write. That was before I found out he had dysgraphia. I just thought, oh my God, his handwriting was just awful. Whatever he says, when he feels it, I also want to validate, because whatever it is, he really feels the way he does, even though for me it's like, oh, you're being so sensitive, but that's me. But for him, I think as a parent, we really want to allow them the space and to validate what they feel, right? Because it is how they feel. They are different. My son is highly sensitive for certain things and highly insensitive to certain things. And, he's not doing it on purpose. And I think if I'm trying to go, oh, that's so silly or something like that, it's not helping both how he feels in our relationship. So I really try. It's very difficult to do that, but I want to think we're all working progresses. We're all masterpieces in making. So if we keep that in mind, we have to be gracious, I think, to ourselves and to our kids too.
So as a parent and as a boy, and as a parent of a gifted boy, I think your advice is wonderful for all boys and how to communicate with all boys. The advice is wonderful. I would add one more thing as a longtime teacher of gifted boys, and that's to ask them what the other boys are thinking about something and how the other boys are feeling about something. And many times that becomes a conversation about how they're feeling too. And so, we're sneaky, right? We're sneaky as parents, we're sneaky as teachers, and we're going to use all these tools. We're coming up to the top of the hour, and I would like to paraphrase a question that we have here in the chat. And that is, if you were to choose something you wanted teachers to know, that how can we help educators learn more? Or what is something you would like all educators to know about gifted outliers in general? I mean, where would that be that one piece you would start with?
I'm filtering through the different pieces to get to the one, right? Because and I'm going to cheat because I can't do one. So my top of my list. The first is, and I am going to make this personal and individual. The first thing I would want my children's teachers to know is I'm not angry at you. Right? And especially when I was at the start of this, sometimes I think they would see me be frustrated. I'm not angry at you, I would say. I'm frustrated by the situation. I'm scared for my child. I'm scared for my family. I'm a really competent adult who's done really competent things, and I've spent time laying down on my kitchen floor crying. And so when you see me coming in, sort of really thinking like, we've got to do this and something has to happen, it really is my most vulnerable too. So I would say like that's really at the top of my list. The other thing to know with the more complex we get with these gifted outliers, the more their appearances can be hiding their vulnerabilities too. And so I think the ones that are the loudest, that are the most disruptive, that are the least compliant, the ones that look like they are the most defiant, oftentimes are hiding a world of hurt and fear about what they can't do. They know they're smart and they know something's gone wrong.
Yeah. If I had to, it's also difficult. There's just so many things. But one thing based on our own personal experience is for educators to let them know that I'm on your side, right? We're here to support you. And I do this while we were in public school. Every year I had pretty much the same spiel. I went to all the teachers, sort of like introduced myself and my son, and sort of gave them my little T-chart of sort of like, these are the conditions where he learns better. These are the conditions, so that hopefully, and letting them know whatever I knew about my son, and that I'm here to support you. I'm very happy to volunteer to do whatever you need in order to be successful with my child. And other than that, I think it has to go both ways, because I can only invite you to clap, but that's one hand. If the other hand is missing, there's only so much. So certain years have been great, and sort of even in that little interaction, I can tell if it's going to be a clapping year or it's going to be like a one-handed year. So I think that's part of the frustration as parents, because we don't have a choice to select certain teachers sometimes. If we know ahead of time, we try to advocate. If we know that specific teachers may be a better fit, then we try to advocate. Sometimes we don't have that choice to do that. So I think as parents, ultimately, we have to make that final decision. If you know what you're walking in, are you prepared for that? And what are you going to do about it?
Caroline and Lynn, I want to thank you so much again for being with us. And I just want to let you know how powerful it was when you shared your journeys and shared your vulnerabilities with us, as well as your insights. And it was such a powerful experience at the end here, being able to walk with you a little bit and step into those insights that you've had over the years and that you have developed in such a personal way. And so I want to thank you again for being with us.